you. So once again, welcome to our Kindergarten 2022 information session, and it's our third one focusing on literacy tonight. Our next session is next Tuesday, so just in 1 week's time, and we will focus on numeracy in that session. So you've already seen this slide, which outlines the key learning areas that we cover at school, and these are all the syllabi that we have to cover as well here in New South Wales. And there's a breakup that we're required to follow, and you'll see here that English covers the biggest chunk, but of course English and literacy skills are embedded in all of the other key learning areas, which is why literacy is such an important area that we focus on at school. So literacy is the ability to read, write, listen, speak, compute, and think strategically. It's across all of the content areas, and of course the ability to communicate is really, really essential in every key learning area and for life as well. And then of course we want to be able to transfer those skills to new situations and new contexts. So in terms of our syllabus, the English syllabus, it looks quite complicated there in that wheel diagram, but essentially we focus on some key objectives, and they're sort of in that second circle in, and it's around communication, using language, thinking creatively, critically and imaginatively, being able to express ourselves, and also being able to reflect on our learning. We also work within the literacy progressions, and we use those to guide how children acquire literacy skills. And the literacy progressions are broken up into speaking and listening, reading and representing, and viewing and writing. So if we look at speaking and listening, you can see how this would be absolutely essential in a classroom. So we need children to be able to respond to spoken texts, respond to instructions, and I'm sure that you'd like your children to respond to instructions and directions as well. And of course, we want students to be able to retell and recall ideas. So they need to be able to listen in order to do that. We also focus on interacting, so knowing the conventions of how things work in a class, as well as conversations with others. So things like eye contact, looking at the person that's talking across the room, responding to questions, and so on. And then, of course, we want our students to be able to speak clearly, communicate in a way that others can understand, using full sentences, using appropriate gestures and greetings, and of course being able to retell things. So our speaking and listening activities are embedded, if you like, across the curriculum. There's lots of speaking and listening that happens in every key learning area, but we do focus on those speaking skills when we're doing things like public speaking. So you'll find as the students settle into school, you'll be asked to prepare for some news presentations along the way, and we get students presenting to the class really early on before they realise that lots of adults find that scary. The next thing I'm going to talk about is reading, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on reading because it is one of the key things that we need to make sure students are able to do really well before they leave primary school. It's almost the most important thing that we need to teach at school in a way. So there is a thing called the Big Six of reading, and these are the 6 things that need to be in place to be a really solid reader. And some of these things develop at the same time. Some of them need to be accumulated in order to reach other ones. So I'm going to cover each of these things: oral language, phonological awareness, phonics, vocab, fluency and comprehension separately, and we'll unpack those a little bit. So oral language is the absolute foundation for learning to read, and it's very much related to overall reading achievement, which is really interesting. And this is something that you can start working on and hopefully have already started working on with your child. So children who are surrounded by and included in rich and increasingly complex conversations have an overwhelming advantage. So please talk to your children all the time. Talk about anything and everything. reading to them, asking questions, talking about the language in the book. All of these things will help to develop that early oral language, and making sure that you're modelling well-spoken English is really important. Even the grammar of your sentences. I know it's really cute when children sort of mispronounce things or put words around the wrong way, but if you can model that correct language in a nice way, that's really helpful for your children as well. So I can't overemphasize how important it is for you to talk to your child all the time to develop that oral language. The second thing, or the second bit of the big six, is what we call phonological awareness, which sounds really fancy, but really it's just about understanding words and word parts, and in particular, being able to hear the sounds in words. So that's really important for both reading and for writing and spelling in particular. And one of the things we really focus on in kindergarten, or in K-2 really, is the ability to blend and segment phonemes. And phonemes is just the proper name for sounds. Phonemic and phonological awareness is completely about sounds. It's nothing to do with anything written on a page. It's just hearing sounds and being able to break them up, manipulate them, and put them back together. And interestingly, phonemic awareness of preschool children is the single best predictor of their future reading ability. So it's really essential that we focus on this skill of phonemic awareness. So being able to hear that there's syllables in words, that words are made up of sounds. So at this point in time, it might be as simple as, you know, when you're having a conversation and you might see a cat, you might say, oh, that's right, cat. Can you hear k at the start of cat? Things like that, or playing I Spy will help with that as well. So I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that you can do to help to develop phonological awareness. The next one is phonics, and you would have come across phonics yourselves, or you would have heard about phonics. So we go through different waves in I guess the approaches that we take to teaching reading. The approach that we take now is based on really solid research, and phonics is a key part of it. Now, you may have heard in the media people kind of arguing, and you might have even heard of the reading wars, where people talk about using phonics or not using phonics. Phonics is absolutely essential, but it's not the only thing that's essential. So it's just one part of the big six. So the phonics is when we start bringing the letters in. We call them graphemes. So each of those letters or graphemes represent sounds that we would hear. So we teach the children the alphabetic code, or the phonics, and we do that in a very systematic sequence that builds over time. We then give students the opportunity to apply that phonics knowledge by reading decodable texts. And the research behind that, and the reason that we do it, is that we want the students to map the letter sound connections. We want them to know that a particular sound we make can be represented by a particular grapheme. And sometimes sounds can be represented by more than one grapheme. So as they build that phonics knowledge, they will start learning, I guess, what you would call the extended code, or the more complicated code. Initially, we obviously start with those single sounds. It's also important to learn some sight words, which includes irregular words that don't necessarily follow phonics code, or the students haven't been exposed to that code yet. The aim is for students to achieve automaticity, so they immediately know those sounds and they can immediately see those sounds on a page, produce the sounds, and then blend them together to read a word. So there's quite a lot that goes into a student actually learning just how to read one word. It's a really complicated process. So vocabulary is the next area that we look at, and vocabulary and having lots of vocabulary within your brain helps you to read for meaning. So we've learnt the phonics, we know about the sounds, we put the sounds together, but now we need to actually connect those sounds and those words to a word that's in their brain, so their vocabulary. And we need to find a logical match so that we're then able to say, okay, I understand what that text says now. So if a child has never heard that word, they won't know whether they're reading a nonsense word or whether they're reading a word that actually exists, and there won't be meaning attached to it. So for obvious reasons, it's really important for us to continue developing vocabulary. So again, we need to be using lots of oral language with our kids and making sure that we're building that vocabulary. And then the fifth area is what we call fluency. Now, when a student first learns how to read, they're going to sound really bumpy. It's going to require a lot of effort. It may take quite a long time even to read one word or one sentence. And that's okay, because they're still learning the sounds that go with the graphemes on the page. But eventually we want to get to the stage where we're reading smoothly, effortlessly, and automatically. Now, that may not happen for quite some time. And then, of course, we want to start looking at expression, so we know how to respond to things like an exclamation mark, and of course, paying attention to punctuation. So students need to get used to stopping at a full stop, phrasing words in a sentence together so that they don't sound like a robot. And fluency comes from extensive reading practice of texts at an independent level, and it takes a long, long time to get there. So it will sound bumpy. They may say the cat, eel, will, and things like that as the students are starting to read. That's absolutely normal, as they are mapping the sounds and those words in their brain. So it will take lots and lots of practice. And then I guess the culmination of all of those things is reading comprehension. Eventually, we want our students to be able to read to learn. And of course, in high school, that's exactly what we do. We do a lot of reading to learn. And then, of course, we do the same in university. But we need to get to that stage. So we kind of go through that understanding sounds, learning the phonics code, being able to blend it all together. We then need to be able to read it fluently, making sure that we understand the vocabulary, and then we get to comprehension. So in order to comprehend really well, we need to be fluent and have automatic decoding. Of course, we need the vocabulary, and we also need background knowledge. So there's lots of things that come together in order to learn to read. It's a really complicated process, and it's not a natural process that just happens. It needs to be explicitly taught for most children. So how do we do it? So there's a range of things that we do, and I'm just going to give you a really brief overview of how we do it, but I'm more than happy to answer questions if you would like me to go into more detail. So one of the things that we do to address phonemic awareness is we teach something called the Hegarty program, which is a full phonemic awareness program where students are taught how to attend to sounds and how to manipulate sounds. And that's done pretty much every day following a really systematic program which builds that phonemic awareness. We also do a daily morning routine, which incorporates a whole range of things, but one of those things is synthetic phonics. So what that means is that we're teaching systematically the sounds that make up our English language. So there's 44 sounds, and we teach those over time, including the different representations as they get into their reading experience, if you like. We also do daily vocabulary instruction, so we're explicitly teaching new words to students to add it to their vocabulary, and they're often linked to the books that we might be reading. There's modelled reading, so that's where a teacher will be reading a book that probably the students aren't ready to read themselves yet, but we still want them to be exposed to those higher level books and lots of language. And within that, there's additional vocabulary instruction, there's questions, there's discussion, there's predictions and retells and all of those things that you would expect in kindergarten. Our students also participate in guided reading with decodable books. So a small group of students will sit with the teacher while the rest of the students are doing some independent activities. and they will be reading some decodable books. So really attending to the sounds, practicing the blending of words and working towards phrasing, using punctuation and so on. They'd also do some comprehension where it's appropriate. The literacy activities that are done either independently or in a guided way are all related to other things that have already been taught. So that's kind of like practice, if you like. And of course, there will be some homework, or there always is for kindergarten students, and that always relates to reviewing sounds that have been taught, sight words that have been taught, as well as home reading. And I mentioned before that we'll be asking you to assist with students getting ready to do some news as well. That sounds like quite a lot, but I promise you it won't be too overwhelming. So moving on to writing, we think about writing as the opposite of reading in some ways. So the reading side is the decoding and getting the words off the page, if you like. And the writing is what we call encoding. So that's where we're hearing a word, we're segmenting the sounds in those words, and then we've got to try and write down the letters that match the sounds that we're hearing. So within our daily morning routine, when we're doing our phonics, for example, we would be reading those phonics sounds and reading words with the sounds that we're focusing on, but we're also writing them as well. So we might put a picture up and say, okay, what word would this be? That's a hat. Let's stretch it out. What sounds can you hear? Her, at. Let's write it. And then we practice writing. So we're doing decoding as well as encoding. There's lots and lots of handwriting practice that needs to happen to make sure that students are forming letters correctly, using the downstrokes, starting letters in the correct place, because obviously we would like the handwriting to be decipherable. There's also grammar and punctuation built into our daily morning routine, making sure we've got capital letters at the start of sentences when we're up to writing sentences, and then of course our end punctuation. So we also participate in modelled handwriting, where students will be copying what the teacher does. You know, we might write a letter in the air, we might write our letter with our finger on the carpet, we might then use our whiteboard marker to write a particular letter. So there's lots and lots of practice. Students will also participate in modelled, guided and independent writing. So they might copy a sentence, they might then have a go at writing their own sentence with help, or parts of a sentence, or they might have a sentence starter. And then eventually we want our students to be able to write independently. And of course that takes a little bit of time as well. And don't be surprised if you find that your child has a little bit more difficulty writing. They might be a really great reader, but the writing comes a little bit later. That's perfectly normal. Okay, so I guess the next part is to really talk about how can you get your child ready for all of these things that need to happen at school. And the thing I guess I would encourage the most is to talk to your child. So the oral language development is going to help every aspect of literacy. So please talk to your child about anything, about everything. They might drive you crazy asking a million questions, but that's actually fantastic if they're talking to you. And as part of that, try to get them to talk in full sentences. The next thing I would say is read. So lots and lots of reading, and you'll see the little picture on the right. Reading to children, even before they can understand, teaches them to associate books with love and affection, and they'll start picking up on those sounds. They'll get the idea of turning the page, and they'll have that relationship with books that is an enjoyable one, a positive relationship. And just asking your child lots of questions about the stories that you're reading is really helpful as well, so you can see how that links in with our speaking and listening. Another thing that you could do is work on having your child follow multi-step instructions. So start off, you might need to work on doing simple one-step instructions first, and then maybe add an extra instruction for them. So being able to do that and comprehend as well as respond to those instructions is really helpful. So they're all pretty simple things that you can do. The next one is to answer and ask questions. So get them to ask questions about the book. Encourage them to be curious about the world. and of course, answer any questions that they might have. Please get your child to practice asking for help when it's needed. Sometimes students can be a little bit shy to ask for help. So if you can get them practicing doing that with a grandparent or with a friend or a relative, that's really helpful to give them that confidence to ask for help when they need it. This one's a really important one, singing and reciting rhymes. Now, the reason this is really important is that it develops the phonological awareness that I've already introduced you to. It gets students involved in understanding rhymes, starting sounds, things like alliteration, where you might have several words that start with the same sound, for example, and having students or your child attend to those is the beginning of the journey of phonological awareness. So lots of singing and rhymes is really, really helpful. And it's kind of nice bringing out the old rhymes that you might have recited when you were a child. Speaking in full sentences is really helpful. When we start learning and teaching children to write, if they're not speaking in full sentences, they find it really difficult to write a full sentence. We often say to students, if you can say a sentence, you can write a sentence, but that obviously is contingent on them actually speaking in full sentences. So if you could pick that up with your child when they're not speaking in a full sentence and actually get them to re-say whatever it was that they were asking for, that is really, really helpful. Where possible, if you can expand your child's vocabulary, introduce them to new things, tell them about things in the world, describe them together, which brings me into the next one to do with positional and descriptive language. So talking about something that's underneath, on top of, beside, to the left of, to the right of, you know, what colour is that car? That car is a red car. You know, that's a massive dog. So rather than just saying it's a big dog, you can very easily introduce a word like massive, and now that's in, you practice it a couple of times and it's part of your child's vocabulary. So just in our everyday interactions with our children, we can actually start developing additional vocabulary and helping that oral language so that when we go to read, we just know so much more. And it's really easy then to make connections to things that we already know. Another thing you can do is play some oral sound and word games. I Spy is a favourite of mine because you can focus on that beginning sound. The other thing you can do with I Spy that helps to develop phonological awareness is split up the words. So you might say, I can see a k, at. What can I see? And then hopefully your child will be able to say a cat. And you can imagine that when your child then goes to read the word cat, and they'll know the sounds k, at, and they'll be able to put them together and actually hear that it's not k, at, it's a cat. And they're able to, almost like a slinky, you've stretched it out and then we can flick it back together, say the sounds really quickly, and we've got that word. So you can do that with any word, but I would recommend that you do it with a short, we call it a CVC word, a consonant, vowel, consonant word to begin with. And there's lots and lots of word games, things like Zingo that you could play. I'm sure that you've seen those ones. Anything where you're attending to sounds and looking at words is really, really helpful in leading up to school. And of course, the other benefit of games is that there's turn taking and there's talking about things. So there's lots of benefits to playing games. The other thing I'd recommend you do is to be working on fine motor skills. So one of the things that can happen when children start kindergarten is that maybe if they're a child that didn't like colouring in at preschool, they may have some weaknesses in their fine motor skills and in their ability to hold a pencil, for example, and control that pencil. So if they're not that interested in holding pencils, things that you might do is have pegs, for example, and ask your child to move the pegs from one side to the other, or helping you with the washing. They may be able to move those pegs around and they're pinching them. So encouraging them to use their index finger and thumb of their dominant hand so that we are strengthening those muscles. Same with things like Play-Doh, lots of squeezing, lots of rolling will help with developing those fine motor skills so that when we go to write, it's much, much easier. A little hint, if you are teaching your child to hold a pencil, I don't know if it'll actually come up on the screen. If you do with your finger and thumb, a quack, 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 grab hold of your pencil and then turn is a good way to get that pencil grip happening. The other thing, which I know we've already spoken to you about, is recognising and writing the name. And if you could really focus on having a capital letter only at the start and then the rest lowercase, that would be great. It's not absolutely essential, but it's very helpful, particularly the recognising side of things. Okay, so that's kind of the end of what I was going to talk about. As you know, at Sylvania Heights Public School, every child is known, cared for and valued, and through innovative quality teaching, our students are empowered to be successful learners who are respectful and resilient. And I hope that you really feel that about our school. So I'm now going to hand over for some questions. So I'll stop the sharing. And please feel free to turn on your microphone or and/or your camera, or if you'd like to put a question in the chat, I'm more than happy to answer those. And I'll give you a few moments to think about that too. I know I've given you a lot of information tonight. And we've got a comment. Thank you, Margot. So Margot's here again tonight as well.
Oh, Rach, I just want to say you're amazing, and the kinder team are incredible. Your knowledge of English and mathematics, it's just so wonderful to see what happens in a kindergarten classroom. And it's compared to when I was in a kindergarten classroom, you're lucky if you could tie up your shoelaces and count to 10. And what I see now is just amazing. And can I just throw in, I taught a year 2 class yesterday, and we learnt the word in our year 2 review, the word pandemonium. So to learn that word in a year 2 class, I was blown away. By the end of the day, every child knew what pandemonium was. So, and all the other words that we put in our reviews, I think is, exhilarating. It's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you, Margot. Sounds like there's no questions, but if something does come up for you, please feel free to pop it into our Facebook page, or of course, we're more than happy for you to send an email or make a phone call to the school as well. And just recapping on what's been sent out regarding our transition, so that we're very happy to report that the transition sessions are going ahead. So we're very excited about that. If you could just make sure that you take note of what time you've been asked to turn up, and just follow the signs when you come into the school. And only one parent will be able to attend the site on the day. And you just need to make sure that you've done your enrolment forms and that person is vaccinated and also signs in when they come into the school. So just be aware of that, because I'd hate to have upset at the gate when we say, I'm sorry, only one parent can come in. So if you could prepare your child for that, that would be really, really appreciated. But we're very excited that we'll get to see the lovely students that come.